We've talked about annuals, we've talked about perennials, and now today we're going to talk about the top new proven winter shrubs for 2025. Hi, I'm Heidi from Garden Crossings, and today I went through the list of the 25 new proven winter shrub varieties and chose my favorite 9. So I am in a growing zone 6A. So a lot of these varieties we're talking about today are hardy in at least a zone 6A, but many of them are hardy in cooler climates as well as warmer climates as well. So you might be wondering, what are Heidi's favorites? And I'm going to tell you in just a second. So before I do though, I want to let you know a lot of these plant varieties, and actually I think most of them actually, that I'm going to talk about today, I put on my favorite list because I've actually been able to go out in the trial gardens at Proven Winners Spring Meadow Nursery and be able to see them out in a real life garden or landscape setting. I don't like to talk about a plant if I really haven't been able to see it or experience it either in my own gardens or in a trial garden, and we're fortunate enough to be located about 12 or so miles from Spring Meadow Nursery, which is the home of the Color Choice Shrubs from Proven Winners. And we're about 3 or 4 miles down the road from Walter's Gardens, which is the home of the Proven Winner perennials. So we're just nestled in a very convenient location to be able to have the opportunity to go out into their trial gardens as well as into our own if we have been given some of these plants to trial frequently. So let's begin and take a look at what my first variety is. So the first variety I'm going to talk about today, it's actually a spring blooming butterfly bush. So when I was out at the trial gardens 2 years ago, I had seen this bush in the garden and it looked totally different than anything I had seen before. And Dale, the owner, he happened to be out in his gardens. So I had asked him about it and said, that's a really cool plant. What is it? Because a lot of times these plants aren't named or don't have labels on them, especially if they're in trials. And he says, he goes, that's a spring blooming butterfly bush. What do you think about it? And I'm like, I says, it's kind of cool. It's different. I says, is that something that we might see in the future? And he says, well, we'll see. He always has his little smirk. We'll see. So it was introduced this past summer when we were at Leaderboard, which is a conference that we go to, where we're introduced to the new shrubs that are coming out the following year. So this shrub is called Buddleia Mop Top. It is a fountain butterfly bush, and the name really describes the habit of this plant. So it blooms, as I mentioned, late spring, early summer, and the habit is very fountainy, long draping branches on it. And these branches are just loaded from the very tip of the branch all the way up the stem with the small butterfly bush looking flowers. Now, typically a butterfly bush will have just like a little floret here, or flower on the end of it, where these, the flowers were 18 or so, at least inches long going down the stem. So that was really cool. Also, the foliage on Mop Top is distinctly different than other butterfly bush. It kind of has more narrow and long foliage on it. So even when the plant is not in bloom, late summer, fall, it has really interesting foliage texture that is interesting and adds added interest into the garden as well. So it's hardy in zones 4 to 8. So that's got great hardiness for us here in West Michigan. It gets about 3 to 5 foot tall and about 3 to 5 foot wide. So forms a nice mounding habit. Now, the one I saw in the trial gardens when we were there, I would say it was probably about 4 foot tall by 4 foot wide. So a fairly mature specimen with its beautiful light lavender purple blooms. These do bloom off of the old growth or the previous season's growth. So if you are looking to do any trimming on this plant, if you feel like it needs any shaping or trimming or sizing down, I would recommend doing so after it's done flowering in the spring or early summer. If you wait until late season and trim it, you could potentially be decreasing your chances or eliminating your chances of having blooms on it the following season. It's got fragrant flowers, it's deer resistant, and it's a nice early season blooming shrub that's great for those early season pollinators that arrive. Now, as we go through these shrubs today that we're going to be talking about, I will be putting links down below in the description on YouTube. So that way, if you want more information on these plants, because obviously I'm just giving you a little snapshot and then also my experience with these shrubs. But if you go to our website, which the links will be provided below, you'll be able to read a wealth of information on these plants. And if it's something you're looking for, we are a mail order company, so we can ship them directly to your door. Or if you're in Zeeland, Michigan area or would like to come visit us, we'd love to see you, and we'll have them in our store as well. Everybody, I think, has a love for hydrangeas in some fashion or another. And maybe I'm just putting everybody into a broad category. I don't know. Seems like almost everybody, anyways, loves hydrangeas. So right now we're talking about a new one called Stormproof. It is an arborescent hydrangea or smooth hydrangea, are other names that might ring a bell to you. And if you're familiar with the Incrediball hydrangea that was introduced, I lose track of time, 15, maybe more years ago, that was kind of like the big wow when that was brought to the market. It had huge blooms, sturdy stems. They were comparing it up against the Annabelle hydrangea, which, a lot of people that have hydrangeas in their yard, especially old hydrangeas, would have these old Annabelle hydrangeas. And with any type of water or wind, they would flop really easily. Well, Incrediball, when that was introduced with sturdy stems that held up these extra large flowers. Well, it's been improved to like next level. So now we have Incrediball Stormproof, which has even more sturdy stems, stronger stems that can hold up, again, these very large white flowers. And in the winds and the rains, you're not going to see any flopping on this plant. Unless if it's extreme, obviously, but it's just very sturdy, excellent habit. And it's not like, well, the flowers are smaller, so of course the stems can hold them. Oh no, that's not the case. These are huge blooms, just very iconic blooms. It blooms midsummer. It's hardy in zones 3 to 8, and it gets about 3 to 4 foot tall and 3 to 4 foot wide, creating just a nice mounding habit. Stormproof blooms off of the new growth, so you can trim it in the fall when you're doing your garden cleanup, or you can trim it in the spring when you're doing your garden cleanup. You don't have to worry about sacrificing the blooms because they do bloom off of the new growth. It likes to be grown in sun to part sun locations. It makes an excellent cut flower. I mean, these big, huge flowers are great for bouquets. So definitely something that if you have a cut garden, this would be an excellent plant to add into that cut garden. The one thing with Stormproof, I'll say, is a lot of times people are like, well, how do I turn them blue or how do I turn them pink? Well, that's not these aren't those kind of hydrangeas, okay? So Stormproof is going to always be a white looking flower. You can't turn it blue, you can't turn it pink. Although as it ages, you might see a little bit of lime coloration. You might see some soft pink hues, but pretty much it's going to be a white flower that stays white. Now, I know we have a lot of rose lovers, rose growers out there, and it's always fun when a beautiful, crisp, clean new color comes to the market. This year, the Reminiscent series has expanded with Reminiscent Yellow. So if you love yellow in your garden and you're looking for a deep, vibrant, crisp, clean color yellow, Reminiscent Yellow is definitely going to check that box for you. The fragrant roses, and the nice thing what Proven Winners does is when they are bringing new roses to the market, they're not just bringing, pretty roses. They're making sure that their roses check a lot of boxes. And the one box that's very important to them to make sure it gets checked is disease resistance. So when they are doing their rose trials, they're growing them in the most extreme type conditions. They're growing them in conditions that would promote black spot. It would promote powdery mildew. So if in their trials, if they are showing any signs of black spot or powdery mildew, they're going to automatically get eliminated, thrown out to the junk pile. They're looking for the plants that can withstand these harsh, humid, extreme type conditions. And this Reminiscent Yellow passed all the tests and checked all the boxes. It's hardy in zones 4 to 9. It likes to be grown in full sun, and of course, as roses do, they make an excellent cut flower. It continually blooms throughout the summer. You may need to do some deadheading if you want to. I always like to have the gardeners go out in the garden and deadhead the roses. It just helps promote new growth and more flowers. So I feel like you can get the flower cycle to happen sooner if you're going out there and deadheading it. And again, when you're doing a deadhead, you're also trimming. So when you trim a plant, it creates more branching, and more branching always results in more flowers typically. I would say I would most compare this to like the David Austin type roses as far as the habit of the plant. It's not like a ground cover rose. It's going to be more, just your nice upright type rose. And definitely a great color to be added into the Reminiscent collection. There's already a beautiful coral and white and a light pink. So to add this yellow in, I think it's pretty nice to see that they're looking to expand the coloration in this particular collection. The next plant, I don't talk a lot about Viburnum because there's so many different families of Viburnum, and it's not a plant variety that I'm super comfortable with. I don't know. It's just one of those plants. I mean, I'm sure you all have those plants where you're like, yeah, I would not grow that because I don't know much about it. I'm not comfortable with it. But this year introduced was a new one in the Korean spice family of Viburnum called Spiced Cowboy. Now, this plant I saw out in the trial gardens, not only in the summer when we were there in July, but also when we were there, I think we were there end of October, beginning of November in the trial gardens. And the plant was just as cool in the fall as it was in the summer. So Spiced Cowboy has extra large white blooms that are fragrant, just very, very fragrant. You might see some little hints of pink or blush on the blooms, but primarily they're going to be white in color. Hardy in zones 4 to 8. They like to be grown in a full sun to part sun location. Deer resistant. So if you're looking to check off that deer resistant box, you can do so. Also too, because those flowers are so nice and fragrant, they make an excellent cut flower. So if you want to cut a few stems off your shrub, bring it into the house, your house will be smelling just beautiful. Now, this summer when I saw it, it was a different plant than what I saw this fall. But it was just, there was so many flowers on it. And like I said, the fragrance was just breathtaking. The plant, it can get 6 to 10 foot tall and about 4 to 5 foot wide. So actually this summer we'd gone through the trial garden, saw these new plants, but for whatever reason, I either didn't walk the right direction or I don't know. I didn't see the Spiced Cowboy out in the trial garden. These gardens are huge. So if you go left instead of right, you're surely going to miss something. But this fall, this winter, yeah, like I said, November or October, anyways, late in the season, when I was there, what they had done is they had some pretty mature plants. I think there was maybe 8 or 9 of them that they had trained or trimmed into tree form. So that was first off pretty cool because obviously it's a shrub. Shrubs, are kind of from the ground up in their habit. But there are a lot of shrubs that can be trained into tree form by finding your strongest, most center stem and just trimming all the branching off of it to create a trunk essentially with a beautiful top on it. So this is what I had seen in the garden at that time. And by that time in the season, a lot of the plants had already lost their leaves. So there wasn't a lot of distraction in the garden. But when we came across these Spiced Cowboys, just, looking like trees, topiary, all lining the roadway there, they had beautiful fall foliage, shades of orange and reds and yellows, but also, and this was a confusing fall for the plants around here in West Michigan because it was so warm. We saw a lot of plants that bloom in the spring, rebloom again in the fall because they must have thought it was time to, do their thing again. But there were blooms on this Spiced Cowboy late in the season. So it was just kind of cool to see that, even out of season, it was still putting on a little bit of show of color. So I definitely, like I said, I don't have a lot of viburnums out in our gardens. I think I have brandywine, and I'm going to be having a spot for the Spice Cowboy, and I'm going to try to be able to train it into tree form because I thought that that looked really cool out in those trial gardens. It does bloom off of the old growth. So if you do need to do any trimming on it, we recommend trimming it after it's done blooming in the spring, early summer. If you trim it later in the fall, you could be sacrificing your spring blooms. The next plant is a rhododendron, and Proven Winners has had rhododendrons over the years. They've been purples and pinks and really pretty rhododendrons. But this year they added in a new collection called the Sweet Reward collection. And they almost look more like an azalea, in my opinion. The colors of the Sweet Reward series are what are just absolutely amazing. So, I mean, purples and pinks are nice. Don't get me wrong. I'm a purple pink girl. And the colors that I'm just telling you here are amazing, are not in my color scheme, but yet, oh, they will be because they are so intense and beautiful. So Sweet Reward Coral or Pink, there's two different new varieties for this year, have just super intense, rich colorations. The coral is almost shades of like an orange with a little bit of yellow in it. So that's where I'm saying it's not in my color scheme because I always am telling you how I'm not an orange person. But then in the next breath, I'm telling you all these orange flowers I love. So I think I'm becoming an orange person, to be honest. But I'm in color denial, I think. But it's just the color of these flowers is just unbelievable. Large clusters of flowers. They bloom late spring. So if you're looking for that spring color in the garden, this is a plant that's going to give you those spring colors. Sweet Reward is also a native variety. No, you won't find Sweet Reward out in nature, but rhododendron in general is a native variety of shrub. Nice for those early season pollinators. They do enjoy those flowers. Also, it's fragrant, and it gets about 3 to 6 foot tall and 3 to 6 foot wide. So the ones that I've seen actually in the trials are more around the 3 foot height. And you may be wondering, well, why do you say 3 to 6 foot tall and 3 to 6 foot wide? That's kind of a big spectrum of height, and I would plant a 3 foot plant in a different place than a 6 foot plant. Part of that is because depending on where you live, if you're in a warmer climate, they might grow quicker for you. We're in a cooler climate, they're going to be a little bit slower. But ultimately, what I recommend when you're seeing that range in height is always kind of think along the lines of it's probably going to get to the bigger height eventually. So that would be my recommendation. Plan your spacing on the higher height spectrum or width spectrum that you see when you're seeing that information on plants. So not always is your garden based around flowers. It's important too to add that foliage element in. And there are so many great shrubs that not only have fantastic foliage, but they also have fantastic flowers. So some plants you get kind of a twofer, the flower and the foliage interest. Others, it's going to be all about the foliage. And then some others too, it's, green leaves. It's about the flowers that they're putting on. Well, this new plant introduced this year is a Diervilla. It is a bush honeysuckle, and it's called Jet Black. And I'm sure the name is kind of going to give you little triggers as to the color of the foliage on this plant. It has near black foliage, beautiful glossy foliage. It can be grown in full sun to full shade, but I will say if you grow it in full shade, it's going to look more green. So the more sun you can give Jet Black, the more intense, the more vibrant black foliage it will have. It does produce flowers. They're not super significant flowers. They're kind of small, kind of, I would say the secondary look to the plant, but they are great for the pollinators. The pollinators love them. They're just small, little tubular yellow blooms. So this would also be considered a pollinator plant. Diervilla is a native variety as well. So it really can grow in a lot of different soil conditions, from drier soil to more clay soil, to wetter to drier soil, I said dry already, but from wet to dry soil, it really can be planted just about anywhere. I will say though, don't throw it in the gravel and say survive. You do have to care for it. You do have to give it some water. You need to get your plants established, and then they're able to thrive and survive in areas that they're planted in. Diervilla also is a deer-resistant variety, so if deer tend to be a problem for you in your gardens, you can enjoy the beautiful dark black foliage and not have to worry about those pesky deer in your garden. This next variety is Abelia. It's called Sweet Emotion Blaze. So there has been a Abelia called Sweet Emotion. So Sweet Emotion Blaze, I don't know if it's a upgrade of Sweet Emotion, or if they were growing out a bunch of Sweet Emotion and one of the plants had some really awesome additional qualities. I'm not sure why the name and then why the tag on exactly, but Sweet Emotion Blaze is a great plant for multi-seasons of interest. So Abelia are known for their fragrant blooms. Sweet Emotion Blaze has little bell-shaped white flowers that have just a hint of pink on them at times. It's a long blooming shrub, so I've seen it blooming in the summer. I've even seen it blooming in the fall. So it does put on flowers for quite a while throughout the growing season. But where Sweet Emotion Blaze sets itself apart from the original Sweet Emotion is the fantastic fall foliage. So not only are you getting the flowers throughout the summer, in the fall you're also getting bright, intense foliage color with shades of orange and yellow and red. So anytime a plant has a couple different features to it, flowers, foliage, fall interest, those are definitely things to look for, because if you have a space in your garden dedicated to a plant, what can that plant do for you? Is it going to give you just 3 weeks of interest and the rest of the time it's just a green shrub? Or is it a plant that's going to give you many weeks of interest and even do something different to give you different interest later in the summer? And that's where Sweet Emotion Blaze definitely is a good suggestion. 5 to 6 foot tall and wide, so it can get large. Now, out in the trial gardens, when I saw it, it was about 3 foot tall, so obviously it wasn't a mature shrub yet. And that's one thing, in these trial gardens, the plants are in there for several years. They get moved around a lot. They get trimmed, frequently or at times. A lot of times part of doing trials is how far can you trim it back and what will it look like after a good trim? Or, okay, let's plant it and forget it. And what is it going to do with its natural just growth habit? So there's a lot of trialing that goes into bringing shrubs to the market. I mean, years and years of trial, 10, 12 years sometimes. So it's not just like you find a great plant and 2 years later, there it is on the market. That does happen with some different plants, but especially with shrubs, it takes years and years of trial to know which shrubs are good shrubs. You're weeding out, you might have hundreds of the same plant planted out, but every year you're weeding out weak ones. You're weeding out ones that just don't have the habit, the look that you're going for, until you get down to 3 to 5 shrubs that you're like, okay, this is it. Now let's watch these for a few years. What are they going to do? And of those 3 to 5 shrubs, there's going to be one that's going to stand out above the rest, and that's going to be the one that gets brought to the market. So definitely there's a lot of thought, a lot of time, a lot that goes into bringing these great new plants to the market. So backing it up just a little bit, I just kind of got on a tangent talking about, what goes into these plants and trials. But back to the Sweet Emotion Blaze. Also, that is a deer-resistant shrub, and it can be planted in moderate to moist soil conditions as well as in clay. So if you have clay in your garden, it also would be a selection that you could use in clay spaces as well. Many of you might be familiar with the Sunjoy Neo. It is a fantastic barberry, intense, near red foliage. And I shouldn't say red because there are red barberry, more of an orangey red foliage that just really pops in the landscape. Well, this year they're introducing Sunjoy Fast Neo. Sunjoy Fast Neo colors up quicker than Neo, so it brings that intense orangish red color to the garden quicker in the season. It's a fierce reddish orange color. I mean, Neo is just retina burning, but Fast Neo is just the next level of intensity, of vibrancy. It gets 3 to 5 foot tall and 3 to 4 foot wide, so a little bit taller, I believe, than what Neo gets. So if you're looking for just a little bit taller shrub, that would be good. Hardy in zones 4 to 9, and mostly barberries are grown for their intense foliage color or for their foliage color and interest. They do have just small little thorns on them, so I will put that out there. A lot of times people will use these plants planted in front of like bedroom windows or in front of windows, kind of to deter burglars, I guess, from breaking in, because of the thorns. They do like to be planted in full sun. The more sun they get, the more intense, the more vibrant the coloration is. And obviously with the thorns, also that's going to be a deer resistant plant. The deer, they don't like to really nibble on much that has thorns. They like to be grown in dry to moderate soil locations. So if you're thinking in your head, where would be the perfect place for that, to keep that into mind. One thing I will say is be sure to check your state. A lot of states, barberry are not able to be shipped into. So there will be some of you that will be excluded from being able to have barberry just because of your state restrictions. So that's all listed on our website. If you go to the links for more information, it'll tell you if barberry can be shipped into your state. And the last plant we're going to look at today is, so often, people are looking for, I'm going to say vines. That's what it is. People are looking for vines, something that will grow tall, cover walls, cover fences, grow up trellises, just something to kind of bring the height up. We sell a ton of clematis vines. I think this year we've got over 75 different varieties. But when they're not looking for clematis, they're wanting something different. Honeysuckle is another nice vine that's flowers, good for pollinators. But new this year is a new one. It's called Dress to Thrill. It's a Bignonia or cross vine. Some of you might be familiar with cross vine. And it is just filled with beautiful tubular orange blooms. I mean, I can just, looking at the plant in the trial garden, they had it growing up. They had like metal posts in the ground, and then they wrapped those 3 metal posts with like chicken wire. And I think it was probably about 6 or 8 foot tall, the structure that they had put in the garden to grow this on. And it was totally covered with the vine. And it was loaded with these beautiful bright orange blooms. Tubular blooms, so definitely the type of flower that hummingbirds find interest in. So if you're looking for something that brings hummingbirds to the garden, or hummingbirds if they're in your garden, this would be the type of a plant that they would go after. Now, it can get very large, so if you give it enough space to grow, it can get 12 to 30 foot tall. So definitely something that could do a big job in the garden if you had enough space for it to go and climb. 6 to 9 foot wide typically is how wide it gets. So if you envision having just a giant wall that's 10 foot wide by 30 foot tall, realistically this would be able to climb that. I forgot to look actually. I think it does need to have something to wrap around. I don't think it's going to cling to a brick wall. So there would be more information on that on the website, but I do think it has to have something to wrap around and able to get that height on that plant. It does bloom off of the new and the old growth. So if you do need to trim it at any point, you can. Trimming it in the fall, you would lose kind of your first blooms of the season. So just kind of keep that in mind, but it does bloom off of new and old growth. So if you feel like you need to do any trimming to kind of keep it more sizable for your garden, you can do so without risking not having blooms, in that same season. It can handle drought, like drier areas. So if you do have an area of the garden that maybe doesn't get quite as much water, once you get it established, it should be able to do fine. As mentioned, the hummingbirds do love this plant as well as other pollinators. The foliage is evergreen, so even in the winter, when all the other plants start losing their leaves, this one will keep its leaves, so it will look evergreen. And it is also a native shrub variety or vine variety. So this was my top 9 picks for 2025. As I mentioned, there's 25 different new shrub varieties that are introduced this year. So a lot of great shrubs. I couldn't talk about 25 of them. So I just wanted to pick, 9 that really stood out to me. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. And if there's any information that you want beyond what I kind of talked about today, as mentioned, there will be links down in the description below for you to reference, just a wealth of information on our website. Thanks for watching. I'm Heidi from Garden Crossings.